everyone. My name is Liz. I am from the growth team here at Dfinity Foundation, and welcome to Community Conversations. This is an opportunity to discuss technical developments in the ecosystem with the community itself. So today we have Hazel, the founder of Departure Labs, a dev shop building on the internet computer. Among other things, Departure Labs has created an NFT minter to create on-chain NFTs on the internet computer. Hazel, it is so great to have you on. Everybody, please give her a warm welcome.
Hey, I'm super excited to be here.
Cool. We are so happy to have you. So maybe a good place to start is talk us through how you decided to become a developer and where did your interest with the open web or the internet computer come from?
Sure. I guess ever since I was a little kid, I was like really into building things and like figuring out how stuff works. My favorite thing to play with growing up was Legos, and my favorite story to tell is I once got really frustrated. I couldn't figure out how like remote controls worked. So I took apart our like remote controls in the house. And I was incredibly frustrated when it didn't just explain how they worked after getting them apart. When I got to college, I got really interested. I was interested in computers and I was interested in physics. And I started in college doing computer science. And I did, I don't know, maybe like the first 5 or 6 classes. Realized it wasn't me because we weren't really developing software, which is kind of frustrating. We were mainly just kind of like thinking academically. So I switched over to physics and I graduated with my degree there. From there, I like entered the work world, and I ended up writing computational simulations for like optics at a optics lab. I did that for a while, and then I transitioned to making like software for people. So that's kind of, I ended up doing all of that. For the open web and all of that, I got into Bitcoin back in like 2011. And I'm one of the few people, or the many people, I guess, who lost all of their Bitcoins on like the Mt. Gox hack.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that's kind of a bummer, but I might be able to get them back, or I don't know, maybe the $30 value that they were at the time. Who knows? But it's really interesting, right? This idea of like decentralized money or like decentralized transfer of value. And at the time, on like the Bitcoin Talk forums, people were talking about like colored coins and like the precursors to smart contracts and all of that, which I thought was super interesting. And my frustration at the time was you couldn't build anything. There was like no infrastructure to develop like smart contracts or apps. The biggest thing at the time when I was like looking into this was Just Dice. And Just Dice was like a centralized application, and their whole kick was, well, you can prove that we're being fair. It's provably fair, but we still run on like a centralized server somewhere out in who knows where. So I kind of fell out of space for a while after realizing you couldn't really make the things I was interested in making, and then stumbled across the internet computer from a Medium article. So that brings us to present day.
Oh my goodness. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Do you remember what Medium article it was? I also help write a lot of those. So I'm just curious.
Oh goodness.
You might not remember, though.
I don't rember. It was like the one like introducing the Dfinity internet computer.
Okay, so interesting. I actually didn't know that. So Hazel, from what I understand, on top of having experience building on the internet computer, I think you had also tried developing applications on other blockchain platforms as well. Do you want to talk us through your experience with other blockchain platforms?
Yeah, sure. So I previously experimented building on Ethereum and mainly Neo, just because I like their software development kit better. That was really cool. It worked. My struggle was that for the type of applications I want to build, there's always kind of like a private data component, and it was frustrating. The gas, right? The transaction fees. It's kind of, at the time when I was building these things, it didn't seem like there'd be a strong motivation for just like normal consumers to come on and use the things I wanted to build, because they would have to like spend money every single time they want to interact with the chain.
Right.
So that's kind of the thing that really excites me the most about the internet computer, is that you can develop these, smart contracts, these immutable smart contracts that pay for themselves, right? So you can build these experiences that consumers will want to use, normal everyday people, and then it just works.
Absolutely. And, I am such a big fan of Ethereum and the Ethereum ecosystem, but the fact of the matter is it's so freaking expensive to transact on Ethereum. I'm like a big fan of NFTs. I love to participate in all sorts of NFT drops. And it's like, oh my goodness, even when it's like a free NFT, I have to pay for gas. And that's like, it's a crazy, crazy price point. And even if you use layer two scaling solutions, it's still like orders of magnitude more expensive than what it should be, I think, for a good user experience. So, talk us through some of the earliest tools and applications and use cases you were exploring building on the internet computer.
Sure. So let's think. I think the first thing I ever built and like shared with the world was a little blogging app. It was it was super basic. It was just like cool, like here's a post, and then like the front end could just like loaded some expected like markdown format. But it was really cool. The thing that really got me excited about this was I built in, I believe, I may have not pushed it up, but I built in the capability to write drafts, and those drafts were private, right? That's something you could build a blogging application on any chain out there, but no other chain can have drafts. You also can't upload media to like Ethereum. I don't think I ever baked that in, but that was like next on the list. That was kind of like what sparked everything for me, at least. After that, one of the more interesting experiments that I did was, I think I called it like WASM in the WASM. I embedded a WASM interpreter in a canister, and you could like, run WASM code.
That's so funny. I love the name. It's like I heard you like WASM, so I put WASM in your WASM.
Yeah, I shared that meme. That's the associated meme with it. What I thought was really exciting about that project was the fact that you could execute like arbitrary code in a secure way, right? And that kind of led into this next project I'm still working on. I might abandon, I'm not sure yet. I'm calling it The Machine. There's a book called Crafting Interpreters. And essentially I just worked through the book and I built this like tree walk interpreter and stuck it in a canister. So you can, you can like write code and then upload it into this little tree walk interpreter and it'll like execute it. I have some crazy plans about that, but that's like a little side project. And then I guess finally, there's a lot of them, but the other notable one was I built a little internet computer streaming service. And it's good to note that there's a decent number, I think there's like 2 or 3. I guess that's a decent number of like streaming applications that people have been building on the IC, and they all use WebRTC, which is really exciting, but it won't scale to infinity like something like Twitch, right? So this streaming service that I built it would actually record the audio from your browser, and then it would stream it into the canister, and then there'd be like a buffer of your stream in the canister. And then when people come on, they would just read the stream right from the canister. So in theory, maybe it would scale, I don't know. But I thought it was cool because I uploaded some lo-fi, or I streamed some lo-fi to the internet computer, and I don't think anyone ever listened along, but it was there and I did it. That was on the test net, by the way. I haven't tried this on the real thing. Yeah, I haven't tried it on the real thing.
That is even more impressive. So, on the topic of streaming, there have been several implementations, like you had mentioned. They all use WebRTC, but I'm wondering, through IC streaming, do you think it'd be possible to stream like future community conversations, or?
I don't know, maybe. I was actually toying around with the idea of like IC proxy lets you actually like use HTTP streaming. So like maybe you might be able to hack it together. Quite possibly.
Wow, I'm going to definitely have to explore this because it's like we should do everything natively. Do you know what I mean? Yep. It's like crypto Twitter is on Twitter, the centralized platform. Yep. We're using Zoom. There's like a lot of security pitfalls. It's like all very ironic. So I do think we need to dog food our own products a little bit. So Hazel, bringing us to today, talk us through Departure Labs, your development shop, and especially talk us through Bunched, this open Patreon concept you're developing.
Yeah, so how do I pitch it? Departure Labs is like the purpose of Departure Labs is to build infrastructure and tooling to accelerate the growth and adoption of the IC ecosystem. The thought process there is that we don't know what we don't know right now, and we don't have all of this convenient Web 2 tooling that a lot of developers are accustomed to. And the purpose of Departure is to like figure out what these needs are and then release them as productized open internet services so other developers can come and integrate and just make their lives easier. But like I said, we don't know what we don't know. So our flagship product and kind of this catalyst that we're using to figure out what these challenges are going to be is Bunched. And Bunched is a creator platform that we're hoping we can use creator tokens and collectibles to help creators foster these communities and build their own little ecosystems from their fans. So one of the ideas is that using creator tokens, you can essentially, push along some incentivized curation, where instead of having algorithms that, like Web 2 style algorithms that optimize for like eyeball binding content, like clickbait, and then just like sensationalized content, or like content, for kids or stuff like that, that probably shouldn't be uploaded. You can have this incentivized curation model where you have these curators who would come along and say, hey, this person has an immense amount of skill, they're not getting traction. I'm going to get into their token and then hope to use that as a mechanism and then go promote them, right? So I can go along for the ride when they become successful. And then on top of, this type of creator token, we're going to be building in our Departure Lab NFT contracts, which are up on GitHub. People can go view those today. They're actively development. They're in active development, and we are soliciting PRs and thoughts and comments. But one of the things we'd like to bake into these contracts is the idea of, being portable. So they should be able to be sold anywhere. So whoever's the best person, the best market maker for these things can go and do that. And on top of that, they should have royalties baked in. So if you're a creator and you minted something, it shouldn't be just a fire and forget, like a one-off transaction. You should continue to be rewarded for that. And those royalties should be funneled back into your creator token, right? So that way your whole ecosystem can continue to grow. So that lens of Bunched is mainly focusing on what we've seen today. And we hope to take it a step further, and we hope that we can try to capture this other part of the creator market that hasn't really been, no one's building for them yet. No one knows how to build for them. And that is these influence style creators, where you're somebody who's been super successful on YouTube or super successful on Twitch. And my whole theory, one theory I have is that creators are a catalyst for community. Mm-hmm. And what's next for them, right? Web 2 says, well, the only value you have as a creator is your eyeball binding capacity, and we are going to use that to push ads and give you a small slice.
Completely.
And yeah, exactly. And the kind of the theory that we want to bring about is that no, actually your communities have immense value, and it's actually about giving creators the tools to build these communities and to share ownership of things with them. And we're hoping that we can use NFTs as a form of like community collectibles to kind of foster that interaction and drive that as kind of like a flywheel mechanism, right?
Definitely. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I just saw this like list of top 5 Discords by communities, and one of them was the Discord of Mr. Beast, who's a content creator. Yeah, I know. It's like, and he has so many like lines, like burgers, like different extensions of his brand. It's like super incredible to see. But in particular, when it comes to Bunch, I think what is very compelling is that mostly for content creators, they don't really have they don't have like true ownership, and they don't really have true autonomy when it comes to monetizing their own content. So for example, the people in the audience may have heard of Spank Chain, which I think was one of the earliest use cases of Ethereum. So essentially, when it comes to adult content, that is often like the first industry to pioneer nascent technologies. So Spank Chain's whole thing was that if you're a cam girl on the internet, any platform will take at least 50% of whatever amount you make, which is like, it was just like a crazy amount to take from a platform, and you have no say, right? Because there's only like a finite amount of platforms unless you were to build your own, which would be absolutely ridiculous. And in recent news, I think everyone's heard that OnlyFans had this moment where they said they were banning explicit content. And then there's like a huge uproar in response to that because explicit content is the bread and butter of their platform. They did an about face and said they're suspending the policy, which is totally unclear, I think, for content creators and who might actually quite literally depend on OnlyFans to put bread on the table. So I love this idea of a creator token and really empowering creators to be able to take charge of their futures. So Hazel, do you want to talk us through like some of your thought process when you're coming up with Bunched? And, you know, have you ever been a content creator? Like, why is this vertical especially interesting for you outside of the fact that I think content creation is very, very hot right now overall?
Yeah, sure. So actually, there was a period of time where I was thinking I would be a full-time portrait photographer, or just a. I ended up in portrait. Yeah, so I ended up in portrait photography because that's where their money was. You could do like there was a whole B2B vertical in that space. So that's one little side thing. It's not exactly why I got into this space, but it is kind of near and dear to me. The biggest reason I got into this is I noticed a trend in my own life where my partner and I, every single night, we will sit down and eat dinner and we'll put on a YouTube video, right? So we're watching and we consistently watch a few creators on YouTube together. My partner really likes Joshua Weissman, who is a cooking YouTuber, and he makes all sorts of like exciting, ridiculous content. But the trend that I'm seeing is that more and more people, sorry, I just looked at the chat. Yeah, a B-roll. Thank you, Norton. Shouldn't have done that. Excuse me. So the trend that I'm seeing is that more and more people are ditching cable and they're going to these creators on open platforms like YouTube to consume all their content.
Completely.
I'm like a late person to this game. I just didn't consume media for a long amount of time, but I have a little brother, and growing up, he would rack up the cell phone bill into obscene amounts because he'd fall asleep in his bed watching Twitch streamers.
Oh my goodness.
That's just what he does. And that's what a lot of the younger generation does. They're creators that they follow, or the media that they consume is on these new services like Twitch. They're on these new services like YouTube. They're not new anymore, but that's so that's kind of the problem space. And the frustrating part was, to me, I also do have friends who are like trying to be content creators and they're successfully fostering these communities, but they're incredibly skilled and they just never fall into favor of the algorithm. I have one of my friends who got really big on TikTok for a while and fell in favor of the algorithm and then fell out of favor, right? And it's these kind of like, I don't know, these algorithm gaming systems that kind of made me really frustrated. And because it's all based on advertising, and as soon as that goes away, you're out of luck, right? So that was the other vector, because I started thinking like, well, there's got to be a better way. And what is that better way? And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that the first approach to Bunched was recreating a Patreon, a decentralized Patreon, all about paywalling content. And then the second iteration is now this like creator token, NFT, collectible community building vector. And the motivation for that was, well, a lot of these creators they're struggling to make enough content, right? So they end up using Patreon as like a sneak peek, or just as like a paywall for their community Discord, right? So that's kind of how do you do it better? How do you let them create a monetized community that lets them still upload their content on these platforms where they've gained traction, right? So
I completely agree. Plus, I feel like since the native revenue model of the internet is advertising, it does create like this weird, jarring experience where, for example, I also consume a lot of YouTube. I love this series called Mythical Kitchen, where there's this guy, Josh, who like makes like high-end like fast food meals, just like utterly ridiculous things. And I'll be watching and like super engaged. And then there's like 5 ads, throughout the video. And I'm just like really taken out of the experience. And it's so weird that it feels almost like like barbaric in the sense that it's like, oh, we're still doing this. Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Yep.
no better way to monetize on the internet. Like we're still doing ads like 30 years later. It is so crazy to me. So I find, the ideas that you're pitching with Bunch extremely compelling. So when it comes to Bunched, where are you guys in terms of like a roadmap? Like, is it available to use today for content creators?
So it is not ready for use today. We actually built out 90% of like the paywall style, and then that just didn't seem to fit the bill with this like new pivot that we're working on. So right now, what I'm focusing on is I'm trying to figure out all of like the incentive mechanisms to make this thing work well, right? Because there's a few interesting components here. It's like, what's the incentive mechanism for getting creators on board? Like, how do you incentivize their fans to come actually join this platform? And then how do you incentivize investors to come on board and like, invest in these content creators? So that's like my main area of focus right now. I'm hoping that I don't want to like commit to a timeline, but if I had to commit to a timeline, I would say I'd like to have like a small Bunched in some form out in like 6 to 8 months. Um, However, that is not very exciting, and the ecosystem is moving incredibly quickly. So what we're working on churning out now is we're working on some partnerships with some of the big dApps in the space right now to facilitate minting as a service, as we're calling it. So I'm hoping that Departure can take on the small project, which will also lead into Bunched, which is uh, building out like a minting as a service for some of the bigger dApps, or any dApp really can come just use our infrastructure.
Completely. And I think it's so crazy how like you're doing Departure and Bunch and you have IC streaming and there's just like you have like so many things going on. And it's like it's really incredible just like the speed at which you've been able to execute on your ideas. So speaking about NFTs as it relates to Bunched, there are a lot of different projects currently within the internet computer ecosystem developing their own NFT standards. Do you think that we need one unified standard for an NFT standard for the internet computer? If so, what's your vision of that look like?
Um, so that's a good question. I have a few thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but generally speaking, I think the IC is going to need some like high level standard, and maybe that standard just is around like how do you do transfers, how do we like get the metadata to display these things, and maybe like authorization and stuff like that. So at the very least, I think we need some high level standard to just like facilitate like viewing and trading. Um, Otherwise, I think we do need to like put some work. I think we all need to like continue to put some work in thinking about like what NFTs actually on the IC actually are. So I'm very much guilty of initially thinking, yes, NFTs as pixels. That is what they are. They are purely pixels. And then very quickly I was like, well, why am I thinking about this just as pixels when like I can just as easily serve a website from a canister, right?
Right.
Like an NFT can be a website. And then this latest iteration that I'm thinking about is NFTs as infrastructure, right? Um,
That's an interesting phrase. Like what exactly do you mean by NFTs as infrastructure?
so like what I'm thinking is, well, I guess there's two levels here. There's like the first type of interpretation, which is like an NFT could be like the keys to a dApp essentially, or the keys to the dApp in the sense of like some base level of like functionality, right? Because you still want that infrastructure to be immutable. Like you don't want like it to go away, but maybe you could like transfer ownership or the payment rights to like some dApp using an NFT. And then the level that I'm thinking about right now is more so like we have NFTs, and like what the NFT really is just like proof. It's just that you own something, right? Like what do you own? And then if we're thinking about even something simple, like let's say like a song, I make a song as an NFT. Is there going to need to be some backing infrastructure for like delivering that song to a bunch of different dApps? Like what happens if we have 3 or 4 Spotify services that come along and they all want to integrate with like, all the indie artists meant to this like NFT canister or their own NFTs, and then all these services consume them. Like, would you have to shard that out? Like, how would you deliver, how would you make sure that these services can get access to that? they could just copy it. But then what about royalties? What about like negotiating terms of all those interesting things? So when I say infrastructure, NFT as infrastructure, what I'm just saying is like the ownership rights or the royalty rights to some like backing system that we can build on the IC, because we can do this like incredibly cost effectively, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that music as an NFT use case is still very nascent. I mean, all NFT use cases are very nascent. You know, NFTs are way more than just JPEGs that could be really expensive. But especially as it pertains to music, I find it to be a super interesting use case because, so for example, Spotify is one of the main streaming platforms at the moment. And not a lot of people know this, but if you got 1 million streams on Spotify, like if you were like, you know, made this hit song, you'd be paid like $3,000, which is not enough to live off of. And also, not a lot of people know this, but the monetization model of Spotify has influenced how artists create songs. So what that means is that Spotify doesn't count a song as a listen unless there's like a certain amount of seconds that has elapsed. So a lot of artists and writing songs now, and you'll notice this with a lot of like Gen Z, like new artists, they don't have like extended intros because what happens, like people listen to like a 30-second intro, they get like super bored and then they skip the song and they don't even give it a chance. So I think it's a little, I am a musician and a songwriter myself, and I think it's a little bit scary to think about how like a random arbitrary technology platform and its monetization rules are literally changing art and culture globally. So do you think that when it comes to NFTs on the internet computer, could you imagine, do you have any ideas around like what might be a compelling use case for musicians and artists to be able to benefit from their craft?
Yeah, I mean, I do. That's part of what we're working on. We're not particularly musicians per se. I have two thoughts. I mean, there's kind of like this idea, since you can do private data, like in theory, you could like mint your NFT as like a private, you know, song, and then you could have Spotify services come up or individual consumers come up and like negotiate like the consumption of this, right? Like that is very much possible. On the flip side is, and what very much related to our pivot is like this idea of like the ownership economy. And maybe you create your song and then you let people buy fractionalized ownership of it, right? And then your song's available publicly, and you can use that falling into this kind of this flywheel idea I said a minute ago, where you use that song publicly available for people to consume, and then it builds your brand, you get more fans and they promote you, and you can use these like community mechanisms to like grow yourself, and it's all in like the, you know, the ownership economy style of stuff, right? But generally speaking, I do think for maybe like 90% of these type of like use cases that NFTs will be like the base level building block, right? Like how you actually put important content that for consumption like on chain that shouldn't go away. Maybe you probably won't be minting like your family pictures as NFTs. I would actually, that might be a good use case. You wouldn't be minting just random pictures of flowers and stuff that you take, right, on your cell phone as NFTs. You could, because it's super cost effective on the IC, but that's going off a little bit on the side.
Definitely. And for me, I love the idea of NFTs as a way to monetize virality, particularly when it comes to remixing content, whether that's like memes, you know, there's like certain meme formats that are always super popular on Twitter and across different social channels, or as it pertains to music. So, you know, there's, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun. And I think that a lot of art is derivative anyhow, but if you're able to really trace content back to the original creator, and if the original creator gets some sort of like cut from every other like derivative thereof, I think that's a super, super fascinating monetization model that doesn't revolve around advertising. So I see here in the chat, we have a comment. So Spotify now also controls a lot of the ways to promote songs on Spotify. They've made it very hard to be a playlist curator now, or at least grow your following in doing that. That's true. And landing placement in Spotify official playlists is nearly impossible unless the algorithm loves you. So going back to what you were saying, Hazel, it's like, the algorithm is a black box, right? Like, how do you know as a content creator, what's the criteria? What are the criteria? What's the rubric? What am I supposed to be doing to really have the algorithm favor me? as a content creator to be able to make a living.
Yeah, and I think that's so incredibly frustrating. Just touching upon again what you said, where it's like people are creating their art, and this even in YouTube, people are creating their content on YouTube to satisfy the algorithm, and that's
really?
terrible.
What examples do you have of that? Yeah,
like all the clickbait stuff.
Oh my goodness, actually, that's so true.
I have a really good example. Veritasium made a video. Like the thing was like, this is clickbait, and he used like a clickbaity style caption, or sorry, image of him like dropping something off of like the Beaver Dam or something, as like an example, right, to demonstrate like, hey, we've discovered what the current clickbait formula is that satisfies the algorithm. This is going to be viral, and it was, right?
Yeah,
I think that's not okay.
Like, that's so sad. It's so sad. And I think what's also sad about it is that it flattens a lot of content. Like a lot of content starts to look and sound very similar. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Even like the title, even like the images, like when you type in a search term into the search bar, all of these images now look the same. Do you know what I mean? It's like some really clickbaity title, and the content creator's like, it's like the same base even. It's like really, it's a little bit sad to look at. And I feel like it does stifle creativity. So Hazel, there was a community conversation with Harrison Hines from Fleek earlier this week, which I believe you were also attending. And Harrison had mentioned his thoughts around NFT standards around for the internet computer ecosystem, specifically that because Ethereum is the dominant NFT blockchain platform, that it would make sense for the NFT standards on the internet computer to retain compatibility with Ethereum standards. So what are your thoughts around the importance of interoperability with Ethereum for NFT standards on the internet computer versus developing our own independent NFT standards?
Yeah, so sorry, I was watching the chat when I shouldn't have been. So I completely agree with that, right? And I think one nice things about the IC is we can maintain some level of like cross compatibility. I don't think we exactly know what the shape of the integration, like what the shape of the integration with Ethereum is going to look like. But in the ideal situation where a contract, like a market making contract on Ethereum, could like call and transfer ownership of a NFT canister on the IC, it would be incredibly beneficial to maintain that same level or those same API designs, right? So it would be easier for developers to go and like do that. And vice versa. If we can interact with Ethereum directly from the IC, it would be hugely beneficial to, you know, maintain that cross compatibility between the two. And at first, so I was in that talk and I was listening to this. I'm like, wait, what are you saying, Harrison? I'm not sure I agree with this. But I realized that doesn't mean, that has nothing to do whatsoever with continuing to innovate with the IC contracts. All you have to do is include those APIs in your canisters, and then everything's fine. There is some, oddities maybe around like authorizing and stuff like that, but it's all completely possible, and I completely agree with it in the sense that Ethereum is like the biggest marketplace for all these things today. It's where like all the capital is located. And if we can like drain some of that, or if we can show that we're willing and ready to integrate with Ethereum, then there's even more incentives for existing platforms to come and build on the IC, at least for the content hosting part. There isn't any reason, even in this like minimal integration that you might imagine, there's no reason that Ethereum couldn't figure out a way to, top up some NFT canister periodically with cycles, right? We could have market makers on the IC that convert, Ethereum to cycles or something like that. So there's all these like super cool integrations that you get out of that just from showing that you want to play nicely.
Definitely. And I would say it is early days, even for NFTs on Ethereum. And even if you're looking at NFTs on Ethereum, I think like over 95% of sales are completed on OpenSea. So I mentioned this in my chat with Harrison, but I have a friend of mine who's a really good artist and he's looking to mint NFTs. And he's like, well, should I do it on Ethereum or the internet computer? In my head, I'm like, why does he have to choose? You know what I mean? Like, why can't it all be interoperable? And it will be interoperable in the future. I'm a strong proponent of a rising tide lifts all boats. I do think the open web will be a multi-chain future. So I know it's like a big tendency of people in the crypto space to be very tribalistic, which is probably just inherent in human nature as some sort of like evolutionary measure. But certainly, I think that there's a lot of interesting use cases that use both Ethereum and the internet computer. And hopefully with time, I think that these use cases are much more evident, especially once we've completed our integration with Ethereum. So Hazel, can you talk us through some of the other projects under the Departure Labs umbrella?
Yes, I can. There's one, so I'm excited about all of them, but one that I'm particularly excited about is, I'm calling it a pub sub topic market, essentially. And what that means, if you're not a developer, is I'd like Departure Labs to go build an easy way for dApps to emit events, and then emit events into our service. And then we'll handle getting those events to the subscribers and handle, making sure that they're either at least paying for their consumption or maybe even charging a small fee on top of that consumption. My big thing is, I think the IC wins through being composable, and IC wins through dApps integrating with one another. We haven't really seen that yet, right? We haven't seen dApps we haven't seen dApps collaborating yet. And I think that it's early. Like people just got to go hack and like build their stuff. And I'm hoping that if we build this like pub sub topic market, we can just go to like Discover and say, hey, you want to like emit an event for all new posts, and then like people can like build stuff on that. Or we could like go to District and say, hey, every time someone posts or produces a community article, can you like emit an event for that? So that way services can come and like do stuff with this. And once we kind of like build this infrastructure, I think it's going to be like a huge, like putting jet fuel in this like composable service tank, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely.
Another thing I'm really excited about is swarm management. So what the heck does that mean? So essentially my thought process is we're going to see a lot of like single canister dApps and stuff. And then over time, I imagine they'll, spread out and we'll see swarms, right? Maybe you'll have like 5 indexing canisters, or like, 5, or maybe you have a canister for every user or something like that. And one thing I'd like us to go build is this swarm management application. Like, so you can kind of peer and see who needs cycles, how do you keep those things topped up? How can you maybe upgrade those over the wire if that's something that you're doing, if it's not like immutable architecture. And then spawning off of that is this idea of like canister observability. So all IC canisters follow the active model, they process messages. Since you have like this message processing system, eventually messages are going to start queuing. And that's something you probably want to know is happening. If you have message queuing, it means you have users just waiting for responses from the system. So these are the type of things that we're thinking about. Maybe it's early, but yeah. And then like a reach goal, or something I think is really interesting and might not be something we work on, is like content hosting as a service. One of the projects that we built and released and is still floating on the IC is IC picture thing. And right. IC picture thing, I think I need to like change out the canister. It's just like, hey, upload your images and videos and stuff, and we'll just like serve them. And I think that's really cool. I'd like to like productize that and like make it, it has a purpose. I'd like to, productize that and make it so it's easy for other apps to like leverage this service and then release front-end clients. So that way app developers don't have to go and figure out content chunking on their own. Like, we've already figured that out. So you should just use our service. So those are some like early projects that we're thinking about.
No, I love all of that. And I love that they're all, a lot of them are like infrastructure related, because as you mentioned, I think composability is one of the key differentiators for why you would even build on a blockchain platform. And to date, it's still early days, right? We've only been live for around 4 months as a platform, but it's like, I have these like thoughts in my head where I'm like, oh, what if there was like, an integration with Open Chat, with Discover, so there's like a native like chat function and so on and so forth. And I'm just thinking about all of these like big social Legos and how that would all fit together and how creators would monetize from that. And, listening to what Departure Labs is working on makes me very optimistic about the future of our ecosystem, because I would love to see these like modular use cases spring up. And I'm sure there are that exist, but I think with the infrastructure that you're building, it would definitely be a flywheel for this kind of growth.
Yeah.
So Hazel, last question before we move on to Q&A. So at a high level, what are you most excited about when it comes to Bunch or any of the other projects that you described under the umbrella of Departure Labs?
So previously, before we did this little pivot, I would have said getting creator content on chain. I think one of the most exciting things about the IC and that we haven't seen on any other chain before is this ability to get just immense amount of data on chain cost effectively and keep it there, more or less, keep it there in a way that's like predictable, if that makes sense. Like we know how much we know how much it's going to cost to store data. What I'm really excited about Bunched is now, in addition to getting content on chain, is providing this like immutable infrastructure for creators to go and build their own little communities. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Essentially, like if we give this foundation and we give this access to these creators to like build these communities and like have these fans like gain status and like recognition and like collect these like creator collectibles, like what's going to happen as a result of that? Because it's going to be all on chain, right? And it's all going to be open. So what are the extensions are going to look like? One of the more interesting things, that's the more interesting component of all this, is like what's going to happen or what are people going to create that we never imagined? So at the base level, Bunch is supposed to be like this creator protocol, and we have our own ideas, but I don't know, maybe someone figures out how to make like a Twitch or a Twitch integration for Bunched, and then there's like this chat feature, or maybe there's like actually a decentralized Twitch on the IC that can like natively integrate with this. So those are kind of things I'm really excited about, like getting creators like using this, getting some like content on chain, and then just like seeing what wild things people can go and like spawn off of this.
Definitely. And, something that just came to mind is that in putting all content on chain, I wonder how that would change how content is consumed. So on different sort of social channels, different types of content are meant to be like more transient, and other contents on other channels are meant to be more permanent. So for example, I think a lot of us here use Twitter. So if you use Twitter, you might know that Twitter recently sunsetted Fleets, which was like the Instagram Reels kind of thing. And the reason for that is it works for Instagram because the photos are like the permanent content, and then you can have the transient fun content be part of Reels. With Twitter, like people tweet so many times in a day, I know I do, that all of the content is kind of transient, which is why Fleets didn't really take off, because they already have transient content on the platform. So in contrast, there are platforms like Reddit where like years later, like through SEO, you still dig up like super old posts that are really relevant. But if everything was on chain and permanent, and I'm assuming like easy to find and indexed and so on and so forth, I wonder if that would change the nature of content creation itself. Cool. So thank you so much, Hazel. I had a blast chatting with you around Departure Labs and Bunch. You're clearly working on a lot of really interesting things. So I'm going to take this moment to open it up to Q&A from the community. So let me open up the little Q&A box, and let's see what people have here. So first question from the community. Hazel, when it comes to a platform like Bunch, how do you plan on handling content moderation?
Yeah. So content moderation is extremely tricky for a lot of reasons. The first approach that we were considering was having like community moderation, where users can go and report bad content, but that's easily exploited, and like maybe the thing as deploy a swarm of bots, and then like any content can disappear. The current approach that we're considering is maybe, I don't want to call it a guild, but using like a guild-like structure where essentially you have all these creators, they all generally fall into like a few like niches, and essentially if you look at what happens when there's like some controversy on YouTube or something, there's always responses. The people in these ecosystems, and particularly the people in these like niches where they're all creating together, they follow one another and they know what's happening. So that is our current approach to content moderation. It's let them form these guilds or like establish these niches, and then the creators in these spaces are responsible for keeping each other in check. It already happens now. It's super successful. believe it or not, in the adult content creator community, platforms like OnlyFans are only care about covering their butts, but the actual adult content creators have established their own like Telegram deny list groups essentially, because within the adult content creator space, there are certain creators who make content that isn't illegal or isn't bad, but other adult content creators aren't comfortable associating and collaborating with them. That whole space is deeply collaborative. It's super interesting to talk to the people in that space. So I think that's like our current plan. I'm fairly sure it's going to be successful.
Yeah, I think content moderation is a very tricky topic, and it's very important because the internet is basically unusable without some kind of curation, right? Otherwise,
Yep.
it's like dick pics and like swastikas and like just like the worst like dregs of the internet that you could possibly imagine. So I recently read this excellent book on curation and content moderation that I'd recommend to everyone. It's called "The Internet is Garbage." And they just but they talk through a lot of like very successful models of content creation for different platforms online. And you were talking about the adult industry as having one successful model. So the adult industry and I think gaming tend to be two industries which are pioneers for new and emerging technologies. And in particular, I have only played one game of League of Legends, so someone needs to verify what I read in this book. But they were saying that in League of Legends, they have this like moderation system where if people are like trolls, like in the chat, there's a way to like rehabilitate them back into the system, because a lot of a lot of platforms are like very heavy-handed. They just like ban someone, but where does that person go? They like go to another platform. They haven't really like learned from their mistakes. So with this rehabilitation method, it's like, hey, like what you did was wrong, but we're going to like suspend your account for X amount of time, but we're going to allow you to come back, and we hope that you have some time to reflect on what's been said. And I was like, oh, that is really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of ways to structure good behavior, defined as like promoting a healthy and dynamic and thriving community, but it's a highly, highly complex topic, and I'm sure there's no one size fits all kind of solution.
No, so I'm laughing as somebody who stopped playing that game because I did not
really?
see that happen.
Oh
yeah,
no!
Sorry. No, I just stopped playing the game and I went back, and then it was just like people take the game too seriously. But if that's a thing that they're doing now,
yeah,
then
maybe
good on them.
Maybe the author of the book was force-fed some like PR materials from the creators of League of Legends.
We'll see
cool.
What happens.
I know. So next question. Hazel, what is your take on static asset NFTs, like a website making API calls to a server that is off-chain?
As off-chain, I mean, it could work, right? But if you're making if you're making API calls to some like centralized server that exists off-chain, then you do run the risk of it going down, right? So I think I deployed an example of this. I deployed like a website NFT, and I was feeling lazy, and I just embedded like the Tailwind CDN into it Tailwind CSS from like a CDN. A little bit lazy on my part, but oh well. So like I think it's doable, but my concern would be if it goes down or the API changes, your site's immutable, right? So that's all I really have to say on that. You can do it, you just run some long-term risks.
Okay, thank you, Hazel. So next question from the community. For these content creators or other users of your platforms, would you ever plan on hosting and organizing competitions like hackathons, kind of like what Rick has done with Discover?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that'd be super exciting. Once we have this like up and running, I would love to do hackathons and see what people are gonna, like I said, like I want to see what people are gonna do with this.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think like as a decentralized community or whatever, we fully internalized like what it means to deploy code in the cloud that just kind of like sits there and like nobody owns it, or like we all own it,
right?
Or like we can do certain things with it, especially when we start talking about like feature rich like consumer applications, right? Like what does that mean? Especially when you start thinking, if you think of like an analogous type like or to this, right? If you think about like if Twitch or like YouTube tomorrow was just like all of our APIs are open, like we put some like same defaults on them, but like regarding like security, like they're all open now, have at it. Like, what would that mean? And I think that's kind of what we're gonna like see, or what I'm trying to like figure out the consequences of for like the IC. But yes, I would love to do hackathons, and I really want to see what people would build.
Yeah, that would be super interesting to see. I love these community-oriented hackathons. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's just a lot more organic growth. I feel like it's a lot more fun, like a lot more informal. But once Bunch launches, you should definitely get your friend that you mentioned before, who is like a TikTok star, to create some content for your platform, like seed it organically. Cool. So we have a question from our languages team here in the Q&A. So Hazel, if you had 3 Matoka wishes, what would you wish for?
Oh my God. Oh, I wish I knew this. I seriously wish I had this question before so we could put some time to think about it. Okay. I guess
you can do more than 3. You can do more than 3.
Okay. Well, okay. I guess I'm going to cheat a bit. I would like a way that I could, oh my God, what's it called? Application extension. I want like an application extension API. So I could go and inject my own little functions into Matoka. I don't think that's going to be on the roadmap, but if it is, please. I just looked at the chat. Yeah, an auto formatter would be really cool, but that's like, something out there. I would like low-level access to WASM storage, if that's possible. And then let me think. So the low-level access to storage. Yeah, raw call. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat. This is great. Thank you, chat. Keep it coming. Yeah, raw API calls, please. Let me like call some services. Can we? I don't think there's any security implications. So coming from the Java world, we used Jackson very, very, very heavily. It would be nice if we could get like that parser, because I know it's in there. If you could just enable that by default, that'd be really cool. So we could like get some bytes in and out. On top of that, it would be really cool if Matoka could expose just like a 2 bytes method on, or I guess it's like functional, or no, it's not. It's like a 2 bytes on every primitive type. Don't ask me why. I just want it, please. Let me think. Anything else? There's definitely something.
There's definitely a lot of suggestions in the chat from the community. Claudio from our languages team, I hope you're taking notes. I'll send you the chat transcript after.
He says that's more than 3. And I say, please do it.
So Hazel, we got a question from a community member. So Facebook has about 2 billion daily users. When do you think the internet computer can actually handle that amount of traffic and simultaneous users? I don't know if that's a question for Hazel, but Hazel, you can take it if you want.
All right, this is definitely not a question for Hazel, but so I'm trying to like think of my current understanding. So like a single node machine, as I understand it, like only gets like access to like half of the cores, and they can like execute the messages like asynchronously for like, I don't know, what is it? Someone in the chat, is it 24 like canisters or something? No one's gonna save me? Okay. Essentially, I think the IC could handle this, not today, and it depends on how quickly, at least my interpretation is, it depends on how quickly we like make a market for cycles, essentially. Like once we need to ramp up this like cycle burning, because if you onboard machines too quickly, the node providers is going to be angry because they're not going to make any money, right? I think structurally, the complication for like building a Facebook application is going to be distributing your application across enough different, I don't know if it's nodes or subnets. I think it's subnets, because every subnet has to reach consensus. I don't know. Across enough of the subnets, we'll say for now, to make sure that you're not ever going to like saturate one of them with this like message queuing issue, except for the whole gosh darn subnet, which would be really bad. I don't know if that's a failure mode, but I'm imagining it is. So eventually, start building applications and burning cycles, so node providers want to like toss thousands of machines at us, and we can do it.
Oh, I'm completely with you when it comes to the whole cycles burning thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I know that like when you look at online dialogue around the internet computer, so much of it is focused around the price of the token. And it just like frustrates me to no end because I'm like, guys, like pay attention to like what's being built on the IC, pay attention to all these
Yep.
ideas of all of these builders and developers in the space. Like the future is so like interesting and so bright and like I feel so like inspired and honored to be quite frank, like even being able to hold these conversations and talk to everyone here because you people are the ones who are going to make the internet computer like what it is, right? Like without the ecosystem, like the project is literally nothing. So I just also want to take a moment to thank not only Hazel, but all of the attendees on this call for making our community what it is, because it is like such a like speaking of online communities and curation, all that stuff, like everyone is just like such a joy and pleasure to interact with. And I'm excited to see what the future has to bring. So this is a last call for questions in the Q&A. Does anyone have any final questions for Hazel in the minutes that we have left? Going once, going twice. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of our call. So Hazel, such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to see everything that will come out of Departure Labs. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone, take care.